My name is Sarah Steindl, and I'm a student journalist at Santa Clara University reporting on student loan debt, a defining characteristic of the typical American student's life. With the prospect of higher education reform from the Biden administration, it's important to get a better look at what the current consequences of the higher education system look like now, student loan debt being the most dire issue. I spoke with 3 women who all have careers in the path of their college majors, as well as their personal passions, who were all burdened by predatory student loans. Hearing these women's stories from their own voices is critical to fully understanding the way that student loan debt surrounds their lives. I got to speak with Carla Marie Monica, a radio host of her own show, The Carla Marie and Anthony Show, who graduated from Rutgers University with a bachelor's degree in journalism and media studies. She took me through her journey starting her dream career in radio and how she got started paying off an $800 monthly student loan payment on a $10 an hour salary out of college.
Well, I graduated with $103,000 in debt. That's just for undergrad. I spent my freshman year of college going out of state for me at University of Rhode Island, so it was a bit more expensive than the other 3 years of college. But honestly, when you look at the numbers, it's like, oh, what? It was $10,000 more. That's quote unquote nothing compared to the $103,000, which is crazy to think. So I graduated with $103,000 in debt, and as you know, as in the journalism world, you're not making that money, anything comparable to that. So my first job, I was making $10 an hour, working for the #1 radio show, #1 radio market in the world. And that was what I was making. And my student loan payment at the time was $800 a month. And that was because each loan I took out every year with the same company could not be consolidated at the time. They told me, it was a private loan company called NJ Class. I don't even know if they still exist. That they were no longer consolidating student loans at the time. So I had to basically make that many payments. Like, I had to pay each loan as it was an individual loan, even though it was the same company. And on top of that, I also had some federal loans, which were great because the interest rate was lower, but you couldn't take out as much money. It was only a few $1,000s. I couldn't take out, my entire tuition to be in federal loans. So I took out the max I could in federal and did the rest in private. So I was paying $800 a month in total to student loans. And that was a killer. And for a few months I did that, and then I was able to refinance, and I paid $600 a month for a very long time. But my interest rate was 7.4%, which at the time I just would hear adults or people older than me be like, oh, that's more than a mortgage. And I didn't fully understand that until I got older and started understanding how this stuff works. But 7.4% is insane. Like, should be unethical. It is crazy to expect a 22-year-old to be able to pay this amount of money. And it was a struggle. I mean, I lived with my parents, obviously. They paid for my cell phone bill. They paid for my health insurance. They paid for my tolls, which was a lot of money to drive into New York City every day at 4 a.m. I couldn't, take public transportation. So, and I had to pay for parking in New York City. So I paid for parking and my student loans basically every month and had $90 left to save, if anything. Like, that was without buying my own food or doing anything in my life. So that was quite the struggle. And then I obviously got raises and started making more money at my job, and it became bearable. So I refinanced about 3 years ago with SoFi, and not everyone can refinance with SoFi. I think you need to be making a certain amount of money to be able to do it. And I refinanced, and my interest rate went from 7.4% to 4.8%, which is still kind of high if you're comparing it to something like a mortgage in some cases, to 4.8%. And it shaved 11 years off of my payment plan. But if I didn't refinance, I'd literally be paying my student loans until I'm in my 50s. And at that point, a lot of people my age have kids going to college. Mm-hmm. So it's crazy to think what this world is like. And I know no one forces you to go to college, but at the time I didn't have a choice. If I wanted to work in radio, I needed a college degree. And if you really wanted to work anywhere, how many years ago you needed a college degree, and you still do, but there are other options now, and I didn't know then.
I know you were on the career path that you wanted,
right?
But was there any other ways you feel that your loans confined or limited your life, or shaped your life?
Yeah, no, for sure. I was very lucky to buy my own home in 2019, and I feel like I could have done that much sooner if I didn't have my student loans, which is great. You know, it's so simple for someone to say, but you bought your own home, so what? You should be proud. Yeah, I am, but I didn't have enough money for a down payment, so I was literally throwing my money away in rent. And when more people are buying houses, it's better for, you know, our community and housing market in general. So had I been able to save money, I would have been able to buy a home sooner. I personally am not in a rush to start a family, but I know so many people are like, I can't, how am I going to raise a family and live in a home when both my husband and I are paying $1,600 a month towards our student loans? So I know, not for me personally, but I know plenty of people who have pushed off so many things in their lives for that. For me, I would say the biggest thing it inhibited overall was the home buying process and being able to invest my money in something like that, or even invest my money in retirement. I had a 401k, but I couldn't put more money into it because it needed to go to my student loans. And it would have been great to set myself up for retirement so that when I'm 65, I'm not poor and don't have to rely on kids or government funding to be able to pay for things. If I didn't have the student loans, I would have been putting that money into retirement, which is what I wanted to do, which is, I spoke to several people in the finance world, accounting, everything, and they were like, yeah, I mean, you could save the money, but you need to pay off those student loans and get that interest rate, you know, because the interest rate was so high that they were like, you're not going to make the money back in an investment because any 401k or anything you put your money in, the interest rate isn't as high as your student loans. So you need to get that payment down. So it's not like, you know, oh, I wanted to buy more things. I wanted this, I wanted that. It's the future stuff you're looking at, buying a home and retirement or having a family. It's that kind of stuff that it truly hinders. And when you're even younger, when you're 24, so my 24-year-old self, like, I couldn't move out with my parents, out of my parents' home until I was, I think, 25 or 26. So I graduated college and had to move back in with my parents, which everyone was doing. So I understand that it wasn't like an embarrassment thing, but I felt bad for my parents. Like, this kid just graduated college and they're moving back in with you. It's tough. And they obviously loved having me around, but, you know, you just got your college degree. You should be able to take care of yourself. And I couldn't. And that was tough. Like, my parents still had to pay for a lot of things in my life because I couldn't do it, even though I had my dream job.
As someone who has carried student debt, do you have an opinion on the method that the government should handle the student debt crisis? Are you for it?
Sorry, say that. Am I for it or against it?
There's like cancellation, there's income-driven repayment. Do you, as someone who is affected by this issue, do you see a certain approach as like the ideal approach, or do you feel like it's not yet out there?
Yeah, no, I don't know what the ideal approach is, because there's going to be an ideal approach for every single person. You know, everyone's going to have a different ideal approach. If you did income-driven repayment for me, and I was making $10 an hour, like, how does that work? How does the repayment work? Am I basically paying still that same amount forever, or, oh, well, I'm only making this money at 22 and I only have to pay this much of my student loans back, period. I think every situation is going to be different. The issue, it's not an issue, it's a great thing, but everything I've seen that the government wants to do is just waiving or affecting the federal student loans, which is obviously what the government takes care of. The government's not looking at the private student loans, and the issue with that is, well, most students, like me, my parents couldn't afford to send me to college, so I had to take out my entire tuition. My federal student loans didn't cover that. They only covered a portion. So I had to take out, a private student loans. So great. Listen, I'll take anything at that point. It's not going to affect me. But I have my nieces who are struggling at 24 years old, paying their student loans. I mean, they're going to be paying them until their actual kids are in college. So to help them cover, I mean, I just want a better life for them. Don't we all want a better life for the next generation? And if it doesn't affect me, I want it to help them so that they can have a great life. So I think, yes, there needs to be something that is done, even if it is starting with federal loans. But there needs to be some sort of control on the interest rates if there isn't already. I'm obviously more than 10 years removed from it at this point, but there needs to be a control on private loan interest rates. And even going back to, why are colleges charging this much? Where is this money going? Why is it so expensive to go to certain schools? And why are we encouraging kids to go to these expensive schools because it looks good on their resume? And it's just like, my co-host and I went to different colleges. He went to Seton Hall University in New Jersey, and I went to Rutgers University, a state school, and his was way more than mine, and we're in the same place. And obviously that name means something to certain businesses and whatnot, but it's kind of mob-like, or just there's just this weird control that going to college has, and you're basically forced to go to college, not literally, but socially. Like, society is basically telling people you need to go to college to get a job, but you also need to get student loans, and then you're going to get a job that won't help you pay those student loans. It's like, what's the point? And I recommend trade school to people now all the time. I'm like, listen, get a skill you can do with your hands, because you're not going to get replaced if you can do that. And you're going to be making way more money than your counterparts are when they graduate college with their degree and their student loans. I hope so.
I spoke with Laura Diaz de Arce next, a first-generation college student who attended the University of Florida for undergrad, and then Florida Atlantic University for her master's in English. Laura is 33 years old and from Coral Springs, Florida. She's an author and an advocate for mental wellness with Mental Health America. She shared her story with me, starting with graduating high school with an outstanding academic record and community involvement.
So I didn't really know what I was doing. I was a first-generation college student. I didn't have a lot of opportunity, and UF doesn't give any sort of scholarships, which is something that I found out the hard way, outside of athletic scholarships.
Wow.
So I wasn't fully informed about what my options were financially. I just knew that I had to go to college, and I really wanted to go to college because that was my portion for a future. It was something that I worked at since I was a child, by really working hard at, scholastics. That had been my drive. But the financial stuff wasn't necessarily something that I knew, and my parents didn't have any experience in it. I knew that Ivy Leagues were never going to be a thing. So that my options were really limited financially, and I knew that state school was going to be, and my tuition was covered, so let me go ahead and go to the one that was considered the most competitive at the time. The way it was sold to me was like, oh, it's not a big deal. Like, you can pay it, they give you forever to pay it back. I didn't know what that meant. They just made it seem like it wasn't a big deal. So I took out my federal student loans. My parents couldn't give me any money. I was kind of screwed from the start. And then we didn't know how to take out proper loans, so we took out some private loans. And between that, we cobbled together through 4 years about a little over $40,000 that I took out for 4 years, which meant that I basically had spent $10,000 on living expenses and also to pay my loans while I was in school. So you would take out more money to pay your minimum payments on your loans, and each year that kind of increased, which was it's not great. And I excelled in college as well. But when I graduated, one of the portions of the recession. So I couldn't find any full-time employment. For a year, I worked 2 part-time jobs and cobbled together additional work, and I lived with my parents, and all of my money basically went to paying student loans. When I finally was able to find a full-time job, I was working that job and the other 2 jobs for a short period of time. So I was working 3 jobs and then driving through 2 counties in order to do it. And I was making, I think, $10 to start, and that was considered a really high wage at the time because there was nobody hiring anywhere.
In your full-time job?
At my full-time job that I was able to get. which I ended up leaving because there wasn't opportunity for growth or anything like that. So I ended up having to go back to school because I was like, well, at least I can maybe afford a different opportunity here. And ultimately that did grant me other opportunities, but I end up working on like nonprofits and stuff like that because I don't have the ability to do things like really take chances on careers or anything like that. And the only reason I'm able to do what I do now or like live the life I do now is because my husband had no student loans. He had his college paid for by his parents, and we've been able to do things like buy a home, but it's still, he inherited my debt because by the time I graduated my master's, my student loans had gone from like $40,000 to $90,000 from interest. Yeah. And so for the first couple years of my marriage, my entire paycheck went to paying down student loans.
What was your interest rate?
At one point, when the first year of the Trump era happened, my federal student rate, the interest went up to like 12%. Wow. Even though I've been paying down for years, and even though I had really good credit, it didn't really matter. Like the variable interest rate, just the cap went off, and my payments ballooned in a way that I couldn't sustain it. So I was able to refinance after a little bit, but.
So over the course of 10 years, that number more than doubled.
Yeah. Yes. And I've been able to pay some less than 10 years, really, because it kind of doubled within 5 or 6 years. And then now we've been able to pay down. So, for instance, I took $27,000 in federal student loans. And those federal student loans I've been paying down since I was in college, and I've been paying down additional on top of it. And now I owe $33,000.
Do you feel like you knew what you were getting into when you went to college?
Not at all. Not a damn. I didn't know a damn thing. I mean, they make it seem like you're going to have this career, and like when you're young and you're a first generation student, this is the thing that you need to get because you want to have a job, and ultimately it's not like I chose to go to college as somebody chooses to go buy a yacht on a weekend. This is not an expense that you're thinking is just a luxury. This is a necessity because you don't want to end up working jobs where you don't have mobility, or if you have a certain academic acumen, you want to be able to use that work to raise yourself up. And that's the thing that was sold to us. And it's a very predatory system.
How do you feel like carrying that debt with you and the debt just ballooning has affected your view of the United States higher education system?
It's a scam. It's not made for poor people. It's in a lot of ways it's made to punish you for daring to want an education if you're poor. There's no it's a predatory bag of goods because it tells you that you're going to get this degree. And I understand that people are going to look at my degree and think that it's useless, but honestly it's a very flexible degree with a lot of critical thinking, and it's administered to a bunch of different industries. But I knew people that were like PhDs in math that had like months or a year before they could get hired anywhere. A friend who got into law school, and then all of a sudden, like 2 years, couldn't find like a full-time law employment because even if you graduate well, even if you have all of that, because there's not enough jobs, everybody's, you're getting a lot of people that are going into like entry-level positions that have a ton of experience. So we have to decouple the idea that getting this sort of, having the work is going to actually lead to success, because we all know that's not the case anymore.
How do you feel that carrying student debt has affected your mental health and well-being?
Well, I mean, I look at the place I work at. It's been bad. I got very severe. I got very depressed, and I still cry randomly. I'll sit in my shower and just start crying, or I'll talk to my husband about it when I look at my bills and just you can't get all emotional. It's bad. So, and I think about the things we missed out on. So, for us, we wanted to have kids, but we couldn't for years because of the student loan thing. And turns out I have an autoimmune disorder, which is going to make it much harder for us to conceive the longer we try. So we might have lost that opportunity because of my student loans. So, sorry.
No, it's okay.
That's the worst part. All aspects of our life. It affected my ability to get healthcare. It affected our ability to pay things down or to take risks. So, yeah.
Tell me about how you see the best approach to canceling student debt. What do you think?
100%. This is the thing that we look at, like, people are okay with bailouts on a regular basis if, like, an industry is having an issue. But right now we have to realize that student loans, as they've been architected and redone, needs a bailout for the students who are really suffering, or people that were both suffering. And there's no, there's a lot of arguments against it, that it's not economically viable, but it's also not economically advisable to have, like, a bunch of people that are straddled with debt and can't do additional items, in their life. So for instance, like, because I'm Latina, like, a bunch in our community, we're not just going to be supporting ourselves. We have to support our disadvantaged parents who never had retirement plans, who never had the opportunity to get retirement plans. If we want to have children, there's, like, a whole set of support there. So at the same time, you would be bailing out people that have been cheated, that have been sold the wrong bag, like a toxic bag of goods. It's one thing for people to say that, we need to pay back our debts. And I got credit card debt when I was working through everything. I had to take out credit card debt in order to support myself while I was paying down student loans. And the credit card debt was substantially easier to address and fully pay off than these student loans were.
Finally, Carolina Zalaya shared her experience with me as an immigrant and first-generation college student. She graduated from the University of Central Florida with a bachelor's in business in December of 2013. She then graduated from Fordham in the summer of 2019 with a master's in elections and campaign management. We started off by talking about if she knew what she was getting into financially when she decided to get a higher education.
The presumption was that if the government gave you debt, it was a good faith loan, and that someone somewhere had done the math to prove that you'd be able to pay it back. And so when it came time for me to go to school, my parents very much didn't allow us to pursue, like, non-lucrative fields, so to say. So it was basically, you either become, and this is almost like a trope in immigrant communities, where it's like you either become a doctor or a lawyer. In my family, it was you either study business or become a lawyer. So my older brother became a lawyer, and I studied business, and those were, like, the two options, essentially. So when it came time for me to go to school, I went to a public, huge state school in Orlando, and I studied business. It was not what I wanted to study. It was what was supposed to be the lucrative option for me. And I had financial aid, scholarships, and also I took out some loans for my living expenses. And I worked all through college as well, all through the last 2-3 years of my college education, especially the last 2 years. I was working 2-3 jobs, working at Starbucks, working at a bar. I even worked for a couple of political campaigns just to make ends meet while having a loan, while having student debt, while having financial aid, and while having scholarships. So, yeah, I graduated. Took me a minute, and it was really, really, really hard and really, really heartbreaking. I think there was a lot of opportunity cost lost for me during undergrad specifically, mostly because I was fed this notion that I had to study this lucrative career idea, and on top of that, just the high cost of even an enormous public school.
Zero free time. You were studying, working, campaigning.
Yep. I used to force my friends to come, like, to the bar that I worked at so that I could serve them in order to see them. Mm-hmm. Like, that was a thing that I did I would make people come work at the Starbucks, like, come study at the Starbucks that I worked at, so that I would have some semblance of socializing in which I would literally be serving them. So it exhaustive, like truly. And I wasn't, I didn't have health insurance at the time. I ended up losing a couple of back molars because I just couldn't afford to go to see a dentist. It was ridiculous. Yeah.
So from then on, what are some of the ways, as someone with a master's degree, that student debt has inhibited you from making certain life decisions from grad school on, or move forward in other endeavors, whether it's career related or personally?
I was not able to save. My net worth, it continues to be in the negatives, despite being 30 years old and working nonstop since I was 21, 22. I significantly in the negatives. And I wasn't able to put money into a 401k until the student debt freeze. And honestly, not even until the student debt freeze during the pandemic, but until October of last year. Like, I've been looking at my finances, just because the cost of living is so high. And I'm someone who is a success story, allegedly, right? Because I have a degree in my field, and I have a job in my field. And the idea that until a month after my 30th birthday, I wasn't able to have a single dime in not even just a retirement fund, but a savings account is wild. I believe that I did the math at in June of 2020, which was a couple of months after the freeze, I had about $2,000 to my name total. And again, working nonstop for 8-9 years, that's what I had to show for it. And I know that is a better position than a lot of people, and I understand the privilege inherent in that. A lot of people, the percentage of Americans who have any type of retirement savings it's not what it should be. But that's not the story that we were told. I think something like only 4 or 5% of Americans have a graduate degree. And you would think that would put you in the 4 or 5% of income wealth, right? And that's just not the case. Larger than that, I make it a point to only see doctors and healthcare professionals who are young people of color, because they are the most disproportionately affected by the student debt crisis. And I really worry about my healthcare professionals, especially right now during this crazy year of nonstop suffering and illness, because I wouldn't want my healthcare professional to be burdened by worries of debt when they are taking care of me. I want them to be fully present when they are taking care of me, or anyone. And the emotional stress also cannot be highlighted enough. To be someone with no money to show for anything, to be someone living more than paycheck to paycheck, but strangled by that, is exhausting. And coming with so much debt, and I've discussed this with a lot of my friends who also have a lot of student debt, even dating in my late 20s was kind of a nightmare and a worry, because I wondered, am I is someone going to want to be with me long term as a life partner when I come at such a high cost with so much debt? And that's a real emotional fear, a real anxiety. I am nowhere near purchasing a house. I would love to have a business where I am a political consultant and I can specifically talk to local candidates and incorporate and do that. And I can't. It's just not a fiscal reality for me, because that's too much of a risk. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. It really has impacted everything from my emotional ability to do things. I still consider constantly maybe I should take up an additional tutoring job, or maybe I should be a barista again on top of my full-time work. I mean, I had that thought last year during the pandemic and an election year. It is a constant poverty mindset that just kind of never really goes away.
Could you tell me a little bit more about, your Twitter username is Zalaya, hashtag cancel student debt.
Yes.
Tell me why you think that is the approach that, Congress should pass. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm for entire cancellation. There have been a lot of incremental plans that have been suggested. I am someone who does, for the most part, believe in incremental change, even though I'm extremely to the left. I'd rather take something than nothing. But I personally am for full cancellation of debt. The way that the interest accumulates in your student debt is completely different than that of how it accumulates with credit cards and with mortgages. Your interest gets basically like sucked into your original borrowing amount, and then you generate interest on top of that. So let's say it's a 6%. It starts at 100, and then the following year it's $106,000, and then you would generate interest off the $106,000. Mm-hmm. So it snowballs at a ridiculous speed, and in all of my research of this, no one has been able to explain to me why this interest was put in this specific way, when car loans don't work like that, house loans don't work like that, credit cards don't work like that. So for me, it's one of those things where it's like, that is so fundamentally broken that cancellation is truly the only acceptable thing. The level of work that it would require to just sort of calculate how much the original people borrowed would completely overwhelm the education department.